When should a contractor get a public adjuster involved? When should a public adjuster get an attorney involved? Matt Mulholland and I, we're going to take care of this for you right now.
Boom. All right, so we get this question way too often. So I want to get it on the record. When do you get a public adjuster involved in a claim, and when do you get an attorney involved in the claim? And most of the time, this question comes from contractors. The attorney one is sometimes from public adjusters.
I get the question all the time from both.
Yeah.
Seriously. So yes, this is. I was actually asked this today.
Really?
Yeah.
Go figure.
I'll let you take the public adjusting.
Okay, that sounds fair. All right, so a public adjuster's role is to help a policyholder prepare the claim, negotiate on their behalf. At least that is the case for most states that license public adjusters. They can go into the policy and interpret the policy and give advice on the interpretation. They have a fiduciary responsibility to the policyholder. So having said all this, if there is a policy argument that needs to be made, then it's either a public adjuster or an attorney that can do that on behalf of the policyholder. A contractor can't do that. A policyholder can make a policy argument themselves. They don't need a public adjuster themselves. But if the contractor is going to try to make a policy argument, they can't do that. So if you need to make a policy argument to win a claim, that might be the time that you need a public adjuster. If you need the policyholder to say something specific and the policyholder can't write the letter for themselves, you might need a public adjuster. Because you can't write letters for the policyholder to send in as contractors. I want to repeat that. If you are a contractor, you cannot write a letter for the policyholder to send in. That is definitely crossing the line. I don't care what person taught you to do this or even provided you the form. Do not give the policyholder a letter to send in. Stop it. Do you agree that that's violating the law?
As an attorney, I'm going to have to answer this in an attorney way. I would like to see that letter.
I think it's so obvious.
But
though.
yes, if it has anything to do with policy, absolutely.
I mean, if anytime that you are giving something to the policyholder to send in as the policyholder, then you are advising that client on how to handle a claim.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is definitely in the negotiation side of things.
Right.
So what a contractor can do is discuss their bid, talk about the damages, talk about what it would take to repair that, and how much they would charge to do it. If you're arguing for additional living expenses as a contractor, you're wrong. That should be in a public adjuster's hands or an attorney's hands. So when you get to the point where you need a policy argument to be made, or you need the policyholder to say some things that you can't tell the policyholder what to say, maybe you need a public adjuster. If you need a policy argument, you need a public adjuster. That's the reality of it, unless the policyholder is smart enough to be able to do this for themselves.
Is this a good example? If co-insurance comes into play, should a contractor be arguing co-insurance? No,
because it's a policy,
it's a policy argument. See,
you know,
that I'm trying to give. I was just given a specific.
Yeah. If the carrier asks you to provide something because that's what the policy requires, and the contractor helps the policyholder provide that thing, that's one thing. But if the contractor is saying to the insurance company, no, you owe for this, then you're making a policy argument. Here's why. Here's the language. If you're telling the policyholder, here's the language, this is what it says, the carrier owes for this, then you're violating some issues. Now, if you're asking a lot of questions, you can ask questions as a contractor. But if you're at the point where the only way to win a claim is to win a policy argument, you're at the point where you need to get a public adjuster involved. And that's the reality. Do you need a public adjuster on every claim? No. Insurance companies don't believe that either. There are a lot of public adjusters that do believe that. Having a public adjuster on every claim can be useful. Is it required? No. If there is a lot of different coverages involved and most of it isn't something that you're doing the work on, maybe you should have a public adjuster involved. It's almost like having a general contractor where they are handling all the little coverages, like handling all the different subs. So think about it that way. Public adjuster can help the policyholder work through all that crap. So are they useful? Absolutely. Find a good public adjuster, make them on speed dial in your phone, and if you have a policy argument, that's when you get them involved. All right, so
there's a massive distinction between you as a contractor documenting the damages, putting a quote together for those damages, even writing a report of what you saw as damages. That's completely different than you ghostwriting a policy argument for a homeowner to submit to a carrier. So those are just two huge distinctions.
That term ghostwriting, I love that. I love this term. No ghostwriting as contractors. Cut it out. Ghostwriting, straight out for contractors. Do not ghostwrite. It's a great term. I don't care if some trainer that you paid a lot of money to gave you all of these formatted letters that you can hand to the policyholder or send in. Don't do it. All right? The fact that the carrier is seeing a form that looks exactly the same as the last policyholder that you had sent in, that looks exactly the same as the policyholder before that you sent in, you think they can't figure out that that's coming from you when you're the common denominator in all these claims? Of course they can. They keep track of this shit. They have AI now that really keeps track of it. They are onto you. They are onto you. Don't do that. All right, so when would they want to get a attorney involved? Let's start with when would a contractor want to get an attorney involved, and then we'll do public adjuster after that, because I think it's slightly different.
Yeah. If there is a policy argument, well, first, I don't mind the business model of a contractor having a public adjuster on their files, just out the gate as a business model. You know what? It's almost like having an in-house public adjuster that's taking a lot of work off the contractor's shoulders. I mean,
there's so much that a contractor can't do. It almost makes sense to do that. Is it required?
No.
But it's a viable model. That's how my public adjusting firm survived, was acting as the public adjuster for a lot of these contractors where we filed the claim.
Right.
All right. The contractor didn't do it at the kitchen table with the policyholder like they do in many different cases. We were the ones that got everything, and then we filed the claim after we evaluated it and agreed that there was coverages first.
Yep.
So anyway, keep going.
I'll say this: there's some like key points where I'm like, hey, you need to hand it over to an attorney, and we've had an episode before of things that I dislike about plaintiffs' attorneys and first-party claims. One of them is that they try to get involved ASAP. And they kind of are like, oh, well, give it to me as soon as possible. Get it to me as soon as possible. I don't think that is. I don't like that. I don't like when plaintiffs' attorneys do that. I like it when a public adjuster exhausts their routes. Sure. And then because I consult with public adjusters where I'm like, hey, try this, try that.
Well,
if it doesn't work,
so many times, and sometimes it works, even though I'm baffled. Why the fuck would that work, Remington? Just try it. Yeah. Remington, why? Just try it. Fine. Remington, it worked.
Boom. So anyway, I want to say this. There's some, number one, if there's an EUO request, an examination under oath, get an attorney involved. Get an attorney right away. You have to, okay? If you don't, huge disadvantage, massive disadvantage. Okay,
I fucked up a claim that way once.
So get an attorney involved when it comes to that. Number two, if the carrier hires an attorney, unless you are experienced and skilled and you are, I advise public adjusters, if you have that ability and that skill and you've been in this industry for X amount of years and have X amount of claims, hey, you can still run with it and communicate with that attorney. But if you're not, you need to think about getting an attorney involved. You know, you need to really start thinking, you know what? Let's get the insured legal representation because the carrier now has legal representation.
I would like to say this because there's plenty of times where an opposing counsel will get involved, and I was the one negotiating with that opposing counsel, and I was at a point in my career where I could handle that.
Yep.
But even then, guess who I was on the phone with about most of the communication back and forth to find out what I should do next? Remington. Because it was legal counsel that I was dealing with, and I needed someone's opinion that knew better than I did on this. You should always be looking to get information from somebody that would know better. You should have people on speed dial that you can ask questions to.
You should. You should definitely have that.
Even if you feel like you're confident in doing that, it's still a good idea to have somebody on hand, ready to go, to give you some good advice and good answers. Someone that's going to actually give you advice and not just tell you, yeah, you should hand that one to me.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, just get it to me.
Yeah.
And here's like a big picture of when it's time to get an attorney involved. If you're a public adjuster, claims filed, you do the inspection with the insurance carrier, they come out with a partial denial, you ask for a reinspection, they say, no, we're standing on our position. You say, hey, would a repairability test or something of that effect, would that change your mind? They say, yeah, sure, send us something. You do the repairability test, you send it in, they still stand on their position. At that point, it's time to get an attorney involved. When the insurance company has dug their heels in, whether it's 1 month into the claim or 12 months into the claim, once they actually dig their heels in, it's time to start talking to your client about options and elevating the claim to an attorney at that point, because it's just going to sit there.
Yeah. I mean, the trap that you fall into is you think that you can do one more thing and it'll make a difference. And so you need to, before you ever start a claim, you need to say, all right, these are the steps that I got to take. These are the things that I need to perform. If I've performed all of these actions and they are still saying no, or our position stands, or whatever it is, then you've done your full job and you can feel confident. That's the point when I can send this off to an attorney. This is different for everybody's different workflows or different processes. This is going to be different from one company to the next and maybe one state to the next. But you need to establish what is the full role. If you've accomplished all of these things, then you can feel good about handing it off. And that's what I had to do at my company before I got consistent on, all right, no, this is the point where we do this. It had to be part of our workflow that we knew at this point we had to hand it off to an attorney. But that was very difficult for me because I hate the idea of losing. And I felt like I was losing if I was handing it off to an attorney. I know that contractors feel like they are losing if they hand it to a public adjuster. But you got to understand there's a certain amount of your role that you can do only. And if you can't do any more than that, then you can't do any more than that.
Look, you can be Superman or Superwoman, public adjuster, contractor. It doesn't matter how good you are. You're going to have claims that are wrongfully denied or underpaid. Period. In this industry.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So I think because we went through this at some point years and years ago where, you didn't want to lose. You're not losing. At the end of all this, it's a team effort because it is. I'm on the phone with, the public adjuster. I'm on the phone with Matt discussing strategy. How are we going to get, the policyholder what they deserve? And although it took an extra step, win the case. Right. So you're not losing. It's just you called in backup. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I like that plan. As long as I felt like I did my whole job.
Yep.
And that was the key, was I had to figure out where it was where I did it all. Once I felt like I did my whole job, then I was okay handing it off. Because I felt like I did everything that I could do. But until I knew where that line was, then I never felt like I did the whole job.
Yeah.
So you have to know where that line is.
And it's going to be a little experience, and you're just going to know. Yeah. And that's the best way for me to tell a public adjuster. Like, you're going to know once you start doing this more, when it's time to get it to an attorney.
I don't think that line is after you submit an estimate and they just come back and say no.
No.
That's not where the line is.
No. And I also want to say this because I want to clarify it. Like, when an attorney for the carrier gets involved, they hire counsel, It's not that, and I say, look, if you're skilled and you've done this before, you have the experience, like, hey, have the conversations and negotiations with the attorney. But I'm not saying that with other public adjusters that might not have that experience, that you're not capable. But what I'm trying to say is that attorneys know how to talk with other attorneys how to, take different angles to try and get something approved. And let me give you an example of the other way around. If the carrier says, we're going to send an IA out to the property, that Remington, that your client's property, an IA out, do I want to be the one that's up on the roof as well with that IA? Or do I want my really experienced public adjuster up there so they can talk their lingo? What's going to be more successful? It's getting the PA out there to meet with that IA. So that's the kind of apples to apples that I'm talking about. Not that I'm not capable of going up there. I've done it before, right? Sure. But there is a better probability that it's going to be successful because you do this. You talk to the IAs every day. You meet them for inspections every day.
I'll give you another example. Something from personally, I do a lot of repairability assessments. Because I was a roofing contractor that actually performed repairs. I did a lot of repairs when I was a roofing contractor. I wasn't just a sales guy. I did quite a bit of the work myself. And so I knew how to do it. But when I stopped being a roofing contractor and I started being a public adjuster, I no longer had the credentials to be able to say that anymore. I needed to get a contractor involved to perform these repairability assessments to determine if something was repairable and then submit that documentation instead of trying to do it myself. And for a while, I was doing it myself because, honestly, the contractors in my area didn't know what the fuck they were doing when they were doing that. So I did it for them, or I did it for my own claims. And it never really worked out that well. Once I started getting third parties involved, I might have taught them how to do it. And I teach them now how to do this kind of a thing with the Building Experts Institute. But I was teaching contractors how to do it so that they could actually perform this assessment. And then when I was turning in this third-party assessment, I was getting more success. So sometimes you do need that other person that has the credentials, that has the authority to do something. Just because you know what's going on doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. Sometimes you have to have the right credentials. You need to be playing in the right box.
Right, 100%. Well, I'm going to, we're talking about when to pass it off from a contractor to a public adjuster to an attorney. I want to say this when it comes to this chain of events of passing it on. If you're a contractor, get with a public adjuster that you trust. And as a public adjuster, get with an attorney that you trust. And I'm telling you, that's key with this whole process. It just is. And so having that relationship with a public adjuster that is busting their butt to try and get a claim approved for an insured, and vice versa for a public adjuster with an attorney where that they are looking for the best interest of that insured. I say it because it's harder to find than you think. So
that's true.
Make sure you attach your buggy to the right horse, so to speak.
To end this episode then, to go along those lines, let me give you a little bit of insight on how to pick a good public adjuster or a good attorney. A good public adjuster or a good attorney is someone that is trying to tell you how not to hire them. If they can give you good advice that results in you not needing them, they're probably the right person. Would you agree?
I would agree.
I would agree too. All right, that's enough of that shit.